so this video is going to be about the notes from chapter 5 in the textbook. So hopefully you had a chance to read the text for chapter 5. With chapter 4, we introduced the quantitative variable and the distributions that you could make for that, the graphical distributions. But you guys saw the most common one we'll be using will be the histogram. So for this chapter, we're going to continue talking about quantitative distributions, but we're going to talk about comparing two at a time. So I'm going to first talk a little bit about what's called the 5-number summary, then get into what a box and whisker plot is, or what we call a box plot. There's another video that you'll watch on how to make one using Desmos, which is not something you're going to have to do for the test, but I just want to show you that you can actually make this just like a histogram, but you'll see by watching the video that it's much more complicated to make a box plot than it is to make a histogram. And as you can see in histograms, I think they are they tell the story better than the actual box plots do. Okay, and then we'll get into a little bit about outliers. So let's start with what is called the 5-number summary. So the 5-number summary is where you're given the minimum and the maximum, and then you're also given the median. And then you're also, the two numbers that finish those 5 numbers for the 5-number summary are the first quartile and the third quartile. So if you have any chance of making a box plot, you'll need these 5 numbers. All right. And this example of a histogram here is from the textbook, where it gives the average wind speed for every day in 1989. So you can see this. I would describe the distribution of this histogram to be unimodal with some skewness to the right. And you can even see there's a gap between what looks like about 6 miles an hour. There's a gap to over 8 miles an hour, that max of 8.67. So let's move into a box plot. Now, the box and whisker plot, or a box plot, is just another way to show graphically a one at a time quantitative variable. So they've actually matched up here nicely. So you can see the histogram with the green bins and the box plot with the blue box, and then the whiskers are just those bars. Now, something interesting here that we'll get into later is if you look at the right side of the right whisker, you'll see some circles that are filled in with that turquoise color. Those are considered outliers, and I'll get into what that means soon. And then finally, even further right of that, you see an asterisk. That is what we call an extreme outlier. So just going to take a moment here so you can see about this box plot, because you'll have to do some of this work on your exit tickets, and we'll go over that in our class on Wednesday. We'll practice what you're going to do for the exit ticket. But just to let you know here, this line here in the middle is called the median. So it's not in the middle, but when you make a box and whisker plot, that median will usually be around the middle of the box. But whatever line is in the middle of the box, that's the median. If you go to the left, so to like finish making the box, those are the quartiles. That's quartile 1, and that's quartile 3. And then down here, right, the ends of what we call the whiskers, all right, if you don't have any outliers, that's the minimum and the maximum. But what's interesting is, since we have outliers in the high side, this lower one is the min, all right? But these points here are outliers, and then that point, the 8.67, is an extreme outlier. So this last part of the bar, or of the whisker, is not actually the maximum, because you can see the maximum is way out here. So I'm going to show you later in the virtual class how to calculate this, but ultimately this point here, all right, is the farthest data value that is still inside what we're going to call a fence, and we're going to create those fences to determine if something is an outlier or not. So as I said, usually that will be the max, right? Usually it will be the max. In this case, it's not the max because we have outliers present. Okay. Now, a little bit about outliers. These are calculations. So you'll have to do these. You'll see in my video, I use Desmos to do this, but you can do it by hand. So kind of the way you determine the outliers is you have to find first the IQR. Then you're going to multiply the IQR by 1.5. Then you're going to take that number and you're going to subtract it from quartile 1. Okay. So what we do is that's going to create what we call a lower fence. I call it LF for lower fence. Then you're going to take this number here, that 1.5 times the IQR, and add it to quartile 3. And that creates an upper fence. So any data values that are above the upper fence or below the lower fence are considered outliers. Okay, so we'll go in more detail in our class, but ultimately that's the work you have to do to determine if you have any outliers in either direction. Okay, so here's an example of some box plots with outliers. As I said, if you have just the dots that are past the whiskers, those are outliers, and then those asterisks are the extreme outliers. All right, I should have said what that means by extreme. All that means to have an extreme outlier is that it's 3 times the IQR instead of 1.5. So you know how we created those fences for the IQR times 1.5? If you did 3 times the IQR and had a fence that was further, right, even farther, and your values lie past those, then those are extreme outliers. Okay, so again, one kind of main thing about outliers is that if outliers are present, all right, you want to make sure that you're focusing on using the median and IQR, because the median and IQR, I'm not going to say they won't be affected by outliers, but they will not be as affected as the mean and standard deviation, right? As when we talked about this with chapter 4, if you have values that are really low or really high or far away from where the rest of your data values are, that's going to impact your mean. And then obviously your standard deviation is based on the mean, so it'll affect that as well. So if outliers are present, you want to use the median and the IQR. Now, one thing that I like to do is, I guess I should say that here, is if you have an outlier, I always like to look at the distribution with the outlier included and with it excluded. So something that you can, if you're going to do this, for your job, then you might want to look at both to see how much it's really changing. All right, and the last thing is about comparing groups. You're going to do this on the exit ticket, and we're going to practice in class as well. But ultimately, it's always more interesting to compare 2 groups at a time. So we'll be doing some examples where we're actually comparing some box plots. So you can get some practice with comparing those box plots and their 5 numbers from the 5-number summary. So again, if you haven't been reading the book, this is a very quick video that goes over the kind of the high points, and obviously we'll be going over some stuff in class, but it's really important that you take that time to read the chapter, because this is brand new stuff that you probably haven't looked at ever, or if you have, it's been a long time, and not to the depth that that I need you to understand in order to be successful in the test, because this is chapter 5, we've got another chapter 6, and then we're going to start reviewing for our first test. So you're going to see how challenging it's going to become, because all of my tests, even though this is not an AP class, I'm treating this class as if I need you to be ready for college stats. All right, so I'm treating this like an intro college course, with the goal being that if you were to take a college stats course when you go to your university or college, that you will get an A. So we're going to be using questions from the previous AP exams, so they will be very challenging. So just make sure it's not meant to be like something scary, but I want you to understand that this is going to be difficult, and if you're not doing everything you can to prepare, you will be at a disadvantage. All right, so take the time to read the textbook, and I'll see you guys in class.